Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the last of our AWS webinar series. In this webinar, we're going to be covering the AWS Certified DevOps Engineer Certification, what it is, and how to get certified. My name is Jeff, and as always, we'll have Keytron with us, as you've probably seen him in our previous AWS webinars. So we're going to follow the same format as our previous webinars, if you've checked out any of those. For AWS, we're going to talk a little bit about the DevOps engineer. Amazon offers a number of different certifications, so where does that fit? Then we're going to talk a little bit about the AWS job market and the career paths. And then we'll talk about what's on the exam, who should take it, how you can train and get certified, and then, close out with your questions. But let's jump right into it. And as we mentioned, we had previous webinars covering these other certifications, but today we're going to be talking about DevOps. So can you give a little context, Keytron, about what the certification is and what AWS DevOps is?
Yeah, sure. So the DevOps certification really covers, it's usually broken down into 6 topics, but just to give you an idea, it really sets the candidate up to really understand and learn how to build, provision, operate, and manage not just cloud operating systems, but also distributed applications in a cloud platform, specifically AWS in this case. So what that means, like in a little bit more layman way of saying it, is if you think about how we traditionally build applications, right? Like we would have this hardware, whether it be a desktop or a server, that we have limitations around, like this server can have this many gigs of RAM, this much hard drive, this many processors. And we would build applications that could run on that hardware. What's happened with cloud technologies and the way it's allowing us to rethink about how we code and how we build applications is we can build applications based on what it is we need it to do. And the hardware or the requirements, the environment for that code to run in, we have a lot more flexibility with that now. So if you think about the combining of your engineers that typically do some of the network engineering and the infrastructure building, and then you think about your developers that build all the applications that run on top of that, this is really the merging of the two, right? So it's where you all that have a strong development background can come in and really learn about the operations part of it and kind of build yourself into like one person that can kind of carry both those torches as you migrate to an AWS type environment. Some of the things that I've noticed, like when you look at who really should be taking this and what it's for, it really gets you in a position where when you look at things like automating your software development life cycles or your secure software development life cycles, building reproducible life cycles and things of that nature, that's where this really starts to come into play, like with automation and automation of your how you plan, analyze, produce, develop, code, and eventually roll out different applications, different projects, and even all the way down to testing and maintenance. Like all of these things are kind of baked into the platform, and this certification really points you to the techniques, the tools that you need to learn to be able to take full advantage of that.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit then about, just the AWS market, overall. I know you've mentioned on these previous webinars, we were just talking actually before we started the webinar about, everyone really needing like these new skills, whether that's cloud or AI, things like that. So for those who aren't familiar, AWS certifications have been around for more than 10 years. They started offering certifications back in 2013, and this was one of the first ones that they created, in 2015. And it was recently updated back just in March of last year. So it should be well updated and aligned with that update actually aligned it with the AWS well-architected framework. And like all these AWS certifications, definitely good salary potential. Obviously depends on your experience and job role and company, everything you're working for, but frequently on the list of like the top 10, top 20 highest paying IT certifications for the past year. Anything in particular to the DevOps, career path or anything you want to highlight here?
Not really. Just kind of want to, just reiterate the fact that if you think about, one of the big principles in cloud is something called infrastructure as code, right? So that means instead of having physical routers and switches and things of that nature that we learned about back in the day when we were learning how to build networks, all of that stuff is code now. So if you think about that, DevOps kind of makes sense, because if your infrastructure has now become code and you have developers that are writing applications to run on top of that infrastructure, they're really writing code to run on top of code is what it boils down to. So it makes sense to have a certification that embodies that combining of those two as we move into a more software-defined networking and infrastructure as code type of environments. And these numbers really just reflect that rapid movement.
All right, now let's move on and talk about, you already mentioned a little bit briefly, if this cert is right for me, but, to get into more details, what are the prerequisites? Is there a certain level of knowledge you need? As we mentioned in previous webinars, there is a foundational certification and there's associate level certifications, professional, specialty. I guess from my standpoint, I don't know a ton about the certification, but I would assume being professional, maybe you want a certain level of knowledge before diving into that, but can you talk
it's
more?
For sure. So it's definitely not an entry level certification, right? Like it's not one you should start your AWS journey going after, and I can give even a few more recommendations on top of the ones here. So like, I would say you need at least some experience developing code in at least one high level programming language, right? Even if you've got some experience with Python, building, scripting solutions or automation solutions, just have some knowledge and some experience building programs and developing code. Understanding of modern development and operations processes, how do we develop code? And I'm not saying you got to be like an agile expert or like, be steeped in all of these methodologies for development, but you need to have some knowledge and some idea of those things. Also, the ability to implement and manage what we call continuous delivery systems and methodologies in AWS. And what this boils down to is the things that I just named. These are some of the things that you learn. For example, if you had done the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, right? These are the things that you kind of get your hands wet with and you start learning how to do some of these things. Ability to define and deploy monitoring metrics and logging, because again, one of the things that people not often, but sometimes get in trouble with when they're deploying cloud services or deploying things in the cloud is they don't necessarily understand costing and how they're being charged. So they go spin up all these fancy new tools that they have access to. And then suddenly that bill that you've got is like, could be thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're not careful. So, taking a step back, if you have no AWS experience, going and grabbing something like the Solutions Architect Associate so that you understand how to do costing and budgeting and set triggers to where you won't go over. Like if you don't want to spend more than $50 a month in your AWS account, you can set triggers for that to where it won't allow you to go over that much a month. So you need to have that type of foundational knowledge, which is why I say this certification is not really for people that are just learning AWS.
Yeah, now let's jump into, really, I think the meat of the discussion is what is actually on the exam. What are all those different topics that we're going to cover? So, yeah, I think you mentioned at the top that there was these 6 different areas, really, or different skill sets, however you want to, domains, however you want to define it. But can you go through and maybe provide a little context for those on the call about what each one, or what the different skills and knowledge sets that they're going to need in order to pass this exam?
Yeah, so let's just take the first topic here, software development lifecycle automation, or SDLC automation. And I just set it out because I know some people on here may not know what that stands for. But when software or applications are developed, they generally go through an SDLC process. And that process has traditionally been very long and tedious, and most developers, or a lot of developers, don't like doing it that way because it takes extra time. There's a lot of documentation and stuff that you have to do. There's a lot of checking in and checking out of code that you have to do some manual things to do. What this module covers is how do we automate and take away all those tedious things in an AWS environment as we deploy our code in AWS. And that is part of why this is the heaviest weighted, the most heavily weighted section of this exam, is because that just shows you how important that concept and that skill set is. That's one of the main advantages of moving your code and development from traditional environments to an AWS environment, is that automation. Configuration management and infrastructure as code, these are some of the things that you learn about as well. Just really making it to where as you start to deploy distributed applications in these distributed environments, one of the things that you wake up to realize really quickly is the configuration management of that can become a nightmare if you don't use things like CloudFormation and other stuff to kind of help you set that up and do it in a large scale, scalable way. So that's another important topic, and that's thoroughly covered. Resilient cloud solutions, high availability, resilience, meeting your mean time to recovery types of standards and things like that. And what AWS does a good job of with this topic is it shows you how you can really easily transfer, like if you move from a traditional environment to AWS, you get a good dose of just how easy it is to take those RTO requirements or whatever your recovery and objectives are as far as how fast you need to be able to get things up when they go down. Or, if you have like a 99.999% uptime requirement just for your standard operating procedures, you can easily map that to solutions and architectures in AWS. And this module really, or this topic area really focuses on, showing you how to do that, how you implement these things, and how you test to make sure that these things are actually functioning like you designed it. Again, another really important part. And then number 4 here is monitoring and logging. This really sets you up to be able to do a lot of things. When it comes to monitoring and logging, performance comes into play, right? Because you can't really get a good idea of performance without logging and monitoring. Compliance comes into play, security comes into play, incident response comes into play. Everything connects to and hinges around monitoring and logging. Now, it only covers 15%, but it's still a really important area, right? And fortunately, Amazon's made it pretty straightforward for us to build out monitoring and logging solutions. Now, again, this is another reason, touching on the reason I gave about why this is not an entry-level certification. You can go into your dev environment in there and turn on a bunch of monitoring and logging features, and all of a sudden you can like triple the cost of your AWS bill just because of the verbosity level or the level of detail that you've turned on as far as monitoring, right? Those things can make your costs go up. So this is why it's something that you need to be careful with. And like I said, if you have no AWS experience, before you start tweaking with that stuff, you definitely want to go to more of one of the entry-level certs to get you up to speed. But this is an important part. That leads right into nicely incident response and event response. This is one of the areas that organizations deem most important. It's in their top 3 usually, because when you get breached, when an organization gets breached, and make no mistake about it, moving to cloud doesn't put you in a position to where you're never going to get breached. Also, moving to cloud doesn't guarantee that you're going to be less secure. There's these competing concepts out there of, well, when I migrate to a cloud environment, it's going to be less secure because I can't control this, and that. Totally not true. It's all about how you do it and how you build your solution. But also keep in mind, you don't get magic security by moving to cloud either. So you still have to be set up and be prepared for how to respond to incidents as they happen as you move to a cloud environment. Some organizations have learned the hard way. If they just jump in, start deploying these applications in a massive fashion without really understanding that, when something happens, they have trouble responding properly. And everybody knows by now, when you are faced with an incident, it's not, your prevention is a lot less important than your detection and response, right? Like what determines if you survive that event is how you respond to it and detect it. So having your incident response and your event response capabilities mapped out, understood and architected properly in AWS is extremely important. And this topic area really gets deep into that. And then obviously security and compliance. Security is still one of the top things that's on organizations' minds. This bridges nicely to the AWS security specialization. Now, it doesn't go in depth like that does on a lot of the topics, but it goes in depth on the topics related to code, automation, and coding environments, right? So it really goes deep in those specific areas of security. So that's kind of what it covers overall, and that's the things that you'll really have to get sharp on.
Yeah, it was a great summary of what's on the exam. One other interesting thing that I always like to look at in the exam guide is they have a couple different pages on the different technologies and concepts that'll appear, as well as all the different AWS services and features. I didn't list out all the specific AWS services and features because there was so many in there. But yeah, is there anything you want to highlight here, just in terms of what are those different concepts, or is there anything that maybe people struggle with in terms of concepts that you find, or maybe anything you struggled with yourself?
Not really. So what I do want to point out though is, like, if you look at some of these things like compute, storage, containers and database tools and developer tools, these are all things that these aren't things that you will really learn in your prep for this exam. These are things that you're already expected to know. So, and the reason I point that out is you might get questions about these topics that may not seem directly related to development or automation of code deployment or automation of SDLC or anything like that. But that's because you're expected to already understand these things. And part of that is to make sure that as you deploy code and as you deploy coding environments, you understand that there are databases and operating systems and other things underneath that you're doing all the stuff on top of. And you need to understand the implications of what that means. That's why they make sure you understand what you're running, your environment on top of, your code environment on top of. So the technologies that you see here may not appear to be development related, but it's important to know them. One that I see give people trouble a lot of time is the serverless, getting into serverless architecture, tying that together with things like Lambda to, if you can imagine, for example, I'll try to give a high level, not too technical example here. So if you can imagine, when we say EC2 instance, that's just like a virtual machine. So imagine someone took a physical computer, virtualized it, made a virtual copy that could run on another computer and have that running in the cloud. Well, that's one way to do cloud computing, to where when people visit your website, they're actually visiting a virtual machine that's in the AWS cloud. Well, kind of a next generation of that is using something called serverless architecture. Now this, we can talk about containers too, but imagine if when someone visits your website, there's actually no server and no website there until someone tries to visit it. And when they make that request to visit your website, suddenly a bunch of things happen in the background that stands up a copy of your website. So now people hit what looks like your website. But if no one's trying to get to your website, then that website technically doesn't exist, because it's a serverless architecture, whereas your website's really built from code instructions, on the fly as people try to visit it. And that sets us up for maximum scalability, maximum elasticity, to where if you have 1 million visitors all of a sudden, you can handle that, and you only pay for that consumption for the time that you need that 1 million people to be able to visit it. So all of those technologies are important to understand, because one of the things that you're charged with as a developer or a DevOps engineer, taking your organization, kicking and screaming or happily, however they tend to be going, into cloud, is you need to be able to optimize cost. You need to be able to do things as efficiently as possible, but also as cheaply as possible. So if you can get the same performance and the same outcome with two different solutions, and one costs 10 times as much as the other, you need to be able to speak to that and justify why we pick one over the other. And serverless architecture is just one of those things that kind of falls right into that.
Great. Yeah, that's the bulk of the presentation here. We do have one more slide just talking about training options. Obviously, the reason we're doing this series is we recently became an authorized partner for AWS Live Bootcamps. So now you can take their certification training through us, which is a great partnership that we have. So yeah, if you're curious about the AWS Bootcamps, I don't know if Keyshawn want to talk a little bit about that. We do have a question, someone asking if when you take a training with us for AWS, do you get hands-on experience with AWS? So could you maybe explain just a little bit about what someone could expect to get if they were to take one of these boot camps?
Yeah, so in this boot camp, one thing you should expect is tons of hands-on. Because let me just say this, even if you go do self-study and you choose not to take a boot camp, it is going to be extremely difficult to pass this exam without spending a ton of time, relatively speaking, in the actual AWS environment, building and deploying distributed applications. Like, you have to get the hands-on and practice doing that. Otherwise, just some of the little things that they test you on, like, you just wouldn't know, because it's not going to be a rote memorization test, right? They're gonna be testing to see if you can actually design, build, deploy, manage, test, and do maintenance on distributed applications. They're going to be testing to see if you can do those things. So a lot of the phrasing of the questions, it's not like rote memorization, like what tool would you use to do this, A, B, C, or D. It's not that type of question. It's definitely more in depth than that. Like, they might ask you, which serverless architecture would you use if you have to meet this mean time to recovery, return objective, or whatever the case may be. You have to, do it at the most efficient cost. And they might give you several other criteria in there, and you have to be able to pick the right technology and how you would deploy it, and what, like what your SDLC process would look like, how you would automate that. You have to be able to explain that, or pick an answer that explains that best, right? And you might get that same question where they say cost is not an option, cost is not something to consider. Like, cost is not a concern. What you really want to focus on is just maximum performance, right? So all of a sudden, cost is not a factor in that. So you may be able to use some of the more expensive, higher end solutions that's a lot faster, a lot more effective at getting things done quickly, because they've told you cost is not a factor, right? So you have to be able to take those questions like that and pick solutions based on your understanding of how you've deployed those solutions. And it's just really difficult to do that without actually sitting down and going through the exercises. And these boot camps really, really focus on a lot of hands-on.
All right, just about out of time. I think we have time for one of the questions that came in. I had a question about the AWS Developer Cert and some sort of certs, I guess, leading up to this one. I know you provided a little context about like the solutions architect, but for people who've been watching this whole series, is there like a recommended pathway you should go on, or do you recommend they for sure get one of those certifications, or just any kind of commentary on how these different certs fit together for people who are particularly interested in this one?
Yeah, so I've definitely covered some of that throughout today, but really the thing is like you have to kind of be honest and assess where you are, right? Because I wouldn't want to recommend to people to go do a whole bunch of other certifications if they don't need to, right? Like, if you've already got some AWS knowledge and some AWS experience, then you want to kind of weigh that. So, but what I would say, let's start with the people that are brand new to AWS in general. You probably need to start, with the cloud practitioner. Like, let's make sure you understand what AWS and what cloud really is. Like, let's give you foundational knowledge of that. Then I would definitely recommend for that person going to the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, because this is the one where you're going to learn about a lot of the AWS services, definitely the core services, And everything else, no matter which direction you go, is going to be built off of that foundation, right? So at a minimal, cloud practitioner, solutions architect, associate. And then from there, you can kind of pick solutions architect, professional. You can then start going off in the security direction. You can start going off in the data engineer direction, or you can go off into the DevOps direction, which is what we're talking about here. Especially if you're a developer or if you're trying to become a developer, this is some of the things that you can kind of focus on. But for those of you that are coming from like extreme networking backgrounds and you just want to make sure you're solid, doing all of this crazy networking that you do with Cisco and the other vendors that you are used to in AWS, then you would probably do solutions architect, associate, solutions architect, then go right into the advanced networking specialization, right? If you're a person like I see a lot of, like, there's a trend happening now where a lot of data scientists, people with data science backgrounds, are coming into AWS to get into machine learning and AI. I mean, cloud practitioner, solutions architect, and then right into the machine learning and start getting into the specializations that way. So there's that. It just depends on where you're coming from as far as experience and where you're trying to go. But I would say the practitioner, solutions architect, associate would kind of be a good start for just about anybody, even the people with some experience, because I mean, those two kind of prove you have that knowledge.
Awesome. Well, we're just about out of time here, so we're gonna wrap up. Appreciate everyone for joining us, whether you came for just this one webinar or for the entire series. And huge thanks to Keytron for participating in 5 different webinars. If you missed any of the webinars on the other AWS certifications, you can find them all in the resource center on our Infosec website. But yeah, with that, we will wrap up. And there will be a very short survey that will appear. We greatly appreciate if you take a moment just to fill it out, give us your thoughts on this webinar, on the series, and what you would like to see in the future. Thanks, everybody.